Hello and welcome to Lecture 5 on Psychological Disorders. So, we've talked about some of the biological causes of psychological disorders. Now we're going to talk about environmental and cognitive behavioral causes. Then we're also going to discuss sex differences and cultural differences in psychological disorders. So, psychological factors play an important role in the expression and treatment of mental disorders. So a couple of things. There's what's called the family systems model, and this is a diagnostic model that considers problems within an individual as indicating problems within the family. You can think of it as, okay, if a member of the family is ill, the family that itself is ill. And so using this family systems model to help treat someone who is mentally ill, you would treat the family as a whole. Now, does that mean that every individual in the family unit has a mental illness? No, it just means that those who take the family systems approach believe that when one member of the family is mentally ill, it is representing a problem within the family unit itself. That mental illness doesn't just arrive on its own without having a ripple effect throughout the family. There's the sociocultural model, which is a diagnostic model that views psychopathology as the result of the interaction between individuals and their cultures. So, with this perspective, psychopathology is viewed as resulting from conflicts that the individual has with their own culture. An example of this could be sex and gender roles. So one of the issues when we look at depression is, especially in women, one of the issues we explore is, could there be a reaction to, or is the client having a strong reaction to the number of demands that is on them? Women have many hats to wear nowadays, and it gets really exhausting, especially for mothers. And so sometimes with depression, that is something that therapists will talk through with their clients. Could be, what are some of the social norms, the cultural rules that you might feel are in conflict with your own wants and desires. What are those conflicts, and how could they be actually causing maladaptive thinking and behaviors? And then we have the cognitive behavioral approach. And this is a diagnostic model that views psychopathology as the result of learned maladaptive thoughts and beliefs. The central principle is that abnormal behavior is learned, and thus it can be unlearned. This is a really fascinating idea, and there is some research to support this. There's quite a bit of research to support this, that, I'm not saying that mental illness itself is learned. What the theory states is that the maladaptive thinking is learned. And that maladaptive thinking and maladaptive behaviors, engaging in those maladaptive processes, lead to mental illness. And so you have to unlearn those maladaptive patterns, those beliefs, those thoughts and behaviors. Now, when it comes to sex differences in mental illnesses, some mental disorders like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder are equally likely in both sexes. There's no sex difference for those with schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. Other disorders, there can be some tremendous variation based on sex. So, alcohol dependency is much, much more likely in males, where anorexia nervosa is much more likely in females. Females are more likely to experience depression. I think they're 4 times more likely to experience depression than men are. So this should be in your textbook, and I think it's a really helpful graph showing, as you can see, there's really only 3 disorders on this graph that affect men and women equally. And then those in blue are more common in men, and those in green are more common in women. So now there are 2 ways, there's a way of categorizing mental disorders is to divide them into 2 major groups: internalizing disorders and externalizing disorders. So internalizing disorders are characterized by negative emotions. Externalizing disorders are characterized by disinhibition. So internalizing disorders are going to be major depression, generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, whereas externalizing disorders are going to be substance abuse, conduct disorder, antisocial behavior. Externalizing disorders, the symptoms are much more in everyone's face. Where with internalizing disorders, the person with that illness has just absorbed all of their symptoms. With externalizing disorders, the client is exploding all of their symptoms. In general, the disorders associated with internalizing are more prevalent in females, and those associated with externalizing are more prevalent in males. Now, here's a question to think about. So, we do know that major depression and generalized anxiety disorder are more common in women. But there's the question of, are these sex differences because culture reinforces these differences, or are these biologically determined? Like, is the sex difference because of hormone differences in men and women? Social roles are required to be different for men and women. I encourage you to think about why is it that for women, internalizing disorders are more common, where for men, externalizing disorders are more prevalent, more common. Most mental disorders show both universal and culture-specific symptoms. Those disorders with a strong biological component tend to be more similar across cultures. Mental illness and culture is actually quite fascinating. We know that major depressive disorder is cross-cultural. People across the world experience depression. How depression manifests, though, is culturally dependent. So, the symptoms that you might see in a woman in the United States versus a woman with depression in Uganda, they both have the symptoms of depression, but how it manifests itself could be different in each culture. And a lot of that has to do with cultural expectations. So, for so long it was believed that psychological disorders and that psychology in general, that the Western way was what it was for everyone. We didn't really take into account the role of culture. And I think we're finally doing a better job of this, recognizing that, oh wow, look at that. Not all cultures operate the same way as the United States. It took a really, really, really long time to challenge the field of psychology and psychiatry to broaden beyond Western culture. A disorder heavily influenced by learning, context, or both is more likely to differ across cultures. So, as I mentioned, depression is a major mental health problem all over the world, but how it manifests differs by culture. Interestingly, since the 1994 edition of the DSM, so that would have been the DSM-4, the DSM included a number of disorders that tend to occur within specific cultural settings. These are really interesting. We'll look at some in just a moment. The DSM now actually includes a section on cultural syndromes. And these are going to be syndromes that occur in specific cultures or specific regions. Something, as we've learned more about these culture syndromes, it's really helped clinicians and researchers recognize the need to be sensitive to cultural issues. And culture in the United States is much broader than you think it is. There is no single culture here in the United States. The country is too big. And different religions create different subcultures. Different family histories create different subcultures. Different races. I think, the queer community has their own culture and subculture. How we define our culture is based on the groups that we have formed. So, some of the cultural syndromes listed in the DSM-5. Ataque de nervios, uncontrollable shouting or crying, aggression, heat rising in the head, occasional amnesia. This is in the Caribbean and South American Latinos. Dot syndrome has always fascinated me. It is something observed in young males who believe their symptoms are due to loss of semen. Now, I find the fact that it's young males to be interesting because this is when males start to lose a lot of semen. Then we get to, Maladiman is a cultural explanation that sickness has been sent to people to harm their enemies. Visible success makes one vulnerable to attack. It causes various illnesses, including psychosis, depression, and social failure. This is specific to Haiti. Susto, illness attributed to a frightening event that causes the soul to leave the body. Includes sadness, somatic complaints, so physiological complaints, lack of motivation, and difficulty functioning in daily living. And this is going to happen amongst Latinos in the U.S. and Latin America. So give those a read and see what you think. Thanks so much.